All right, so this is, let me get rid of these news articles. This is 128, Hacking Mobile Devices. And what I'm going to do today is just start Chapter 8 and then do a few demos. I just want to mention, by the way, some students came in and they wanted me to teach lockpicking. And they said, you should have a special event where everybody can come in face-to-face to learn lockpicking. And I said, well, I guess you're right. So I picked a day. There it is. So on Monday, March 18, which is about 2 weeks away, week and a half away, just come to that class. I'll teach lockpicking then. I've got a gear here to show you how to pick locks, and you have to be physically here to do it. So anybody that wants to can come, and it's worth extra credit in all my classes. It takes, in my experience, about 45 minutes for someone who has never picked a lock to learn how to pick a lock pretty well. So that whole event will take about an hour, and I'm not going to have a lecture or anything then. I'll just answer questions after that. All right, so be aware of that. Come on March 18 if you want to learn how to pick locks. We used to do it all the time in the hacking class, but it hasn't really been taught face-to-face since before the pandemic, so it's a good idea to resume that. Anyway, let's try Chapter 8 here. So we're going to talk about identifying implementation issues, vulnerabilities that let people get into your Android device. And so today the main thing we're going to talk about is pre-installed applications and a little bit about privilege levels, and there's other topics that will come up in future lectures. So this is usually the case. I mentioned before in the malware analysis class, I talk about this. Usually you want to examine the code written by the least professional developer. You probably don't want to be looking at the internal Android code written by Google because they're pretty serious about their security and they probably aren't making major mistakes there. It's the applications written by other companies that are more likely to have the flaws. Now I see some comments in the chat. Let me go there. Want to buy a lock-picking transparent lock? Yeah, I've got a couple of them. Good, and people want to come. Yep, bring your own gear if you like. I've got some gear. I do have some of those transparent locks. So yeah, come along and learn lock-picking if you want to. It's a lot of fun. So the pre-installed applications are often the weak spot. Not the stuff written by Google, but the stuff added by the person that sells you the handset, like Samsung or somebody. So each installed app now does something, and it has its attack surface. Now, if you exploit an app, and you manage to get control of the app, then you probably don't have root access on the phone. You probably have the privileges of that app. But that means you can exfiltrate the user data in that app. So if they have an app like a PDF reader that's vulnerable, it may have some user data associated with it. So anyway, that's all the PDFs they've attempted to read, that sort of thing. All right, so you want to, now another thing you could do though is you could try to find apps that have high privileges. For example, if the app has the install packages privilege, then you can use it to install malware and get complete control of the machine, or at least install a Trojan app. And this install packages is defined by Android. And I checked on my emulator, I used Drozer. Now, I keep mentioning Drozer in the lecture because I used to use it. I'm not using it anymore. Drozer is just an app you put on your phone, which gives you remote control of that one app. And it didn't turn out to be really worth the bother in my experience. We've got other things we're going to use this semester, but it's mentioned several times in this lecture. It's just an app you put on a phone that you remote control. So it's a simple example of, say, malware you put on a phone. You can make a similar product with Metasploit. I think I might have some projects where you do that, but I don't have any to demonstrate tonight. Anyway, if I run Drozer on the emulator, then I can see, and it does have the install packages permission. So real devices will have more apps with that dangerous permission in practice. One reason they might is because they want to have some kind of custom update rather than making you go to Google Play Store. So that's why the app has to be privileged to install other apps. So now when I checked on my emulator to see how many apps were running as system, there were not very many, and they were all COM Android, except for Genymotion, which was the type of emulator I was running. So most of these came from Google, and a few came from Genymotion. There was nothing else, but that's because it's an emulated device. It's not a real device with a brand name and all the apps that those people want to put in there. Let me just check here. Okay, good. Same all the comments we've had before. All right, so to find remote attack vectors, how are you going to get an attack into the phone? Well, one way is trick the user into installing a malicious app, like send them an SMS message or put an ad up on a web page they see. That's one way. If you can have malware come from the server, if your phone has a listening port, like that one we did before, ES File Explorer, then it's providing service and you can just send attacks over the network, or you can have the attack come from inside the phone by having a document viewer, like a PDF viewer, where people download a PDF and then open it, and the PDF has an attack in it. These are various ways to get attacks into the phone. So browsers and document readers are frequently vulnerable. This is because a lot of these protocols are extremely complicated, like PDF. They have many, many features, and it's a lot of code for the developer to write, and they often make mistakes somewhere. Fuzzers help. For example, Samsung had this thing called Polaris Viewer for PDFs on there by default. The emulator I had did not have any PDF reader at all by default. Right, and you can also have activities that are browsable. These are activities that will open web pages. So this means they have some kind of web browser in there, and they'll respond to such things. You can find this by just looking at the manifest file. And so here's a rogue Drozer agent that will listen. Browsable is listening for anything that comes in with the PWN, PWN, // at the start of it, listening for that schema. So if you do have an app that's listening for something, and Skype, for example, listens for Skype, // then you can feed it that information, and all you have to do is make a malicious web page that will open such a link. Now, in the old days, you could just put it in an iframe so it would automatically open as soon as people viewed the page. But now you'd have to have a link and get them to click on a link or something. That's another way to launch these things. And I just checked for the browsable filters on my emulator, and quite a few apps like Fidelity was browsable, and it's listening for SMS and MMS. That's Android messaging. Fidelity was listening for, I guess, HTTPS. Not quite sure what this means. Oh, it was listening for Fidelity : So they defined their own intent. So apparently the Fidelity is listening for links from web pages that start with Fidelity : / and so on. Let me check here. The other day, some scammer sent me text saying my address was incorrect, saying they were USPS. Yes, there's going to be tons of that. And that's an ongoing issue. All right, now like I say, some apps make their own update mechanism, and if they do, it's very unlikely to be as secure as the Play Store. You'd have to have the installed packages permission, and they might be doing something foolish like loading the file over an insecure network connection, like HTTP or HTTPS, without verifying the certificate, and then an attacker could intrude with a fake update. So then there is this thing called DEX Class Loader. It is available for Android apps, and it allows you to load code remotely. So you add more code to your app while it's running from a server, which sounds really dangerous. And it is really dangerous. So you load new code at runtime, and so you can load code over the network or from a local location that might be overwritten. So of course that code may be modified by somebody, and now you've got code injection. All right, web views, I mentioned before, web views let you open a web page in your app, which looks pretty, is a nice user flow, but it's dangerous if you're not careful. And here's one common flaw that people used to make at least a few years ago, and I bet some of them still are. You define a JavaScript interface in your web view, and then you load from clear text source or course that doesn't verify the TLS certificate, and you target old versions of Android. If you do that, then JavaScript on a page can run into Java on the phone and execute Java commands, which is far more power than ought to be there. And so this is the CVE from 2012 saying the Android API does not restrict the add JavaScript interface method, which allows attackers to execute arbitrary Java code by putting Java reflection code inside JavaScript code. So you can just put code on a page, and just anybody that views that page on their phone will have code running on their machine. So that's a flaw, and they did fix it. And the fix was, if you set to Android 17 or higher, which is one of the Android 4, so it's pretty old, you probably are past this now, then you have to add a special annotation to any method you want available to your JavaScript, so you can no longer execute arbitrary code. You can only execute methods that have been carefully marked to be available to JavaScript. So that's much better. This is what you call allow listing these days. You're only allowed to do special things that have been chosen by the developer, which is much better. All right. And then, of course, is your phone actually listening for network connections on a port? I tried to see what ports were open listening on my emulator, and there were quite a few open. I don't really know what they all are. The camera is listening on a port, which is kind of interesting. I wonder why, and other things are. I'm not quite sure what you can do there. Anyway, So various things might be vulnerable. That's one thing, and we saw this with the ES File Explorer. It had an open port that was accepting FTP commands to download pictures without telling you. And if you receive messages from outside, like SMS, MMS, or CMAS, these all send messages which your phone uses to then pop up something, and all those that might have vulnerabilities. You might be able to send a malicious SMS. I know when Windows phones were out for a few years, they went out and then they abandoned them. They were all vulnerable to an SMS of death. The people, for instance, that had Windows Phone, it would just die frequently because SMSs frequently were too long or otherwise somehow caused some kind of crash, and they cause your whole phone to crash. So you want to find these vulnerabilities, you download the apps, convert them to readable source code, search for vulnerabilities. There's a Drozer scanner module, which sounded good, but in practice wasn't much use at all, which is part of why I quit using Drozer. Here's, for example, here's Drozer's SQL injection scanner, and it can't even find the SQL injection in Civ, which is the product from the same company made to teach you how to use Drozer. So that's when I sort of got fed up with Drozer and said, this thing's just not worth the bother to keep using in class. Most deliberately vulnerable stuff has turned out to be too out of date and weak and broken to really be worth wasting time in class on. Working with real apps is better, pretty much. So to exploit your device, a remote exploit would give you a foothold on the device, and a local exploit would work if you're already on the device. It's like you trick them into installing malware. Those are the two categories of exploits. And you can use attack tools. EtterCap is a famous tool to do man-in-the-middle attacks. I prefer to use the Windows tool Cane, which is easier to use and works better in my experience. But all this is doing is sending out ARP replies, lying to all the machines on your network, claiming that you are the router. So when they try to reach the internet, they will send the traffic to you, which you can then forward to the router. So now you're in the middle as if you had cut a cable and plugged in, and now you'll be able to read and intercept and modify traffic if it's not encrypted. Most traffic is encrypted these days with HTTPS, so the value of being in the middle is lower, but as we've seen, a lot of apps do not verify the TLS certificate, so you can put yourself in the middle and the traffic from the app will not be blocked like it should be. Burp, we've seen. Burp is a very good man-in-the-middle tool, and that's the sort of thing you'd use. It puts up fake TLS certificates, so it will only fool apps and operating systems and devices that don't verify the TLS certificates, but those things are pretty common. All right, and PortStrigger explains how to install the certificate, which we've done in the projects. And so I mentioned Drozer can run as a server and make rogue agents that are like malware. Metasploit can do this too without Drozer. You can make malware APKs to put on a phone, to run exploits just like you can make malware EXEs to run on Windows. All right, and so privilege levels. Here, if you have a shell from a web browser, you manage to have a web page and exploit some kind of vulnerability in the website, now you can have the privileges of the compromised app, but you don't have what's called context. You can execute some commands, but you can't use Java libraries or install packages. You're limited to just what you can reach from inside that app. Now, another way to do it is to take over the app's execution flow entirely, and then you can retrieve the app's context, and then you can do anything the app can do. That's a slightly higher level of privilege, but of course, there's root is what you really want, which is above that. So you can request arbitrary permissions from an installed package. You can, when you install a package, it can ask for all these permissions, and the user will just click OK and approve them all. So you might even get higher privileges. ADB shell can install apps and interact as a developer. And system user is where you have a higher degree of privilege, change device configuration. And then, of course, there's root, which is what we've had on our emulators mostly. Root has ultimate power. You can read and write RAM, manipulate any aspect of the device, change files in the operating system, and so on. So that's the bit we're going to cover this week. Let's take a look at a Kahoot. It's 8A, and the Kahoots are here, and there's 8A. All right. All right. Think you got everybody? All right, so what permission is required for a custom update function? Yep, install packages. All right. All right, what Java class lets an app load new code at runtime, which is pretty insane. Just want to make a note. I've got that, that thing is set too long. All right, dex/loader, that's it. All right. All right, so what intent filter is required if you want to, your app's going to listen to URLs like pwn://foo? That's browsable, and as we saw, the Fidelity app does this, and this means you could put a link on a web page and say, click here to open it in the app on your phone, and then it will send an intent going into your phone. That's what you do this for. All right. But it does mean that requests are coming into your phone from outside, and you better watch out because they might be malicious. They might contain special characters and so on. All right, so which component may allow web page to execute Java code? Those are web views. You have a browser inside your app, and if it has vulnerabilities, people might be able to run Java code through it. So Joe M, right?